Hi, this is Phil Hinton and welcome along to another video here on AV Forums. Today I'm on the south coast of England and we're here to visit Bowers & Wilkins and the new launch of the 700 series S3 speakers, and we're also going to talk to Andy Kerr today and find out a bit more about the speakers and the story behind them. So we're in Studio One and a familiar face on AV Forums videos, anything we do from Bowers & Wilkins, Andy Kerr. Great to see you, Andy.
Nice to see you. Thanks
for taking the time to sit down with us this afternoon. Unfortunately, you guys won't get to see the factory tour because there are some secret squirrel things going on there that we're not allowed to show you just yet. And we can't really do the audio demonstrations because it just wouldn't come across on camera. You're listening to it on a laptop or whatever, you're not going to get the benefits of the sound quality. What we can do though is we can discuss what we've done today, Andy, the reasons behind it, philosophy behind the new 700 S3 speakers, which is what we're here to see and demonstrate and get a feel for. And Ed's review is also on the forums at the minute, so if you're interested, Ed's looked at those. So you can go and read that. It's the 705 S3s. But before we get into the 700s, you wanted me to see the 800 production facility, which is here in the UK. Something that you're very proud of. Maybe tell our members all about that.
I think it's obviously something, it's the foundation stone of the company. I mean, John Bowers is, or was, a Worthing resident. He was born in Worthing in 1922, and our business has been based here for decades. The factory that we've taken the guys around today is Dale Road, Worthing, and it was built in 2001. And it's responsible for the manufacture of all of our flagship products. So we produce our 800 series diamond range, obviously, which is our flagship range, in quantity there, and we've been doing that quite a long time. We make our beautiful, very limited edition, very special Nautilus in there as well. And we also make our pinnacle custom theatre range, the CT800. So it's a bigger place than perhaps people expect. I think that will be the first observation that maybe might have surprised you.
It did.
It's quite a substantial site. There are 275 people all told in the whole building, not all on the manufacturing floor. Some are working upstairs in other aspects of the business, the obvious things that any business needs, whether it's IT, HR and so forth. But we have a significant number of people working on the floor, manufacturing the products and keeping very busy. But the 800 series diamond, as I say, I think it's our pinnacle. You probably heard me talk about it. I know I've said it enough times to you. We regard it as our kind of no holds barred, no expense spared kind of engineering hothouse. And the great reason for taking you around, Phil, was obviously to show you that, but then also to show you how that kind of connects up with the new 700s.
Yeah, because I mean the main thing here that I think you want to get across, and it wasn't something that you hear what a manufacturer says sometimes in terms of trickle-down technology, and you think, yeah, okay, that might happen from product to product, but that's something that you really build into your whole ethos here, is that, yeah, you have your pinnacle 800s, but you do make sure that once you've figured out how to do something, then it doesn't cost as much to do it a second time, and then it can start to trickle down the range. Yeah,
exactly. I mean, I think the analogy that I've used earlier on, in fact, in a conversation with Phil, is if you think about something like going to the moon, once you've worked out how to do it, and obviously that's a complex process, and the engineering resource required to understand it is considerable, subsequently doing it again is simpler because you've solved a lot of those conundrums. So from our perspective, we regard the 800 series diamond as our moonshot. Obviously, I'm well aware it's not quite as complex as that, but you get the point. So what we're trying to say is we put everything that we have and everything that we know in an engineering sense into delivering that. And then having done that, we then spend the next 3 to 4 years of that model's life cycle working out how to reverse engineer, if you like, as much of it as we possibly can and use it elsewhere. Now, there are some things where it just doesn't work. The obvious example would be things like a Diamond Dome. The Diamond Dome high frequency unit that we put in an 800 series is just too expensive to deploy anywhere else. We couldn't put it in another loudspeaker, even though it would make that loudspeaker sound very good. because it would put the price point of that loudspeaker into an unattainable level, so we choose not to do that. But there are other things, such as obviously the continuum cone and the tweeter on top form and lots of other elements that we do use because, well, why wouldn't you? You've got them, you understand how they work, you've proven them in what you'd like to think is the best loudspeaker that you know how to make. So if you can use it, you're pretty confident that it's going to make a big difference to other models in the range.
Now let's move on to 700. So 800 is the pinnacle, it's made here in the UK, the driver's constructed here and so on. 700, that's not quite the case because it's not manufactured in the UK, is it?
Correct.
But it's all to your design, it's in one of your factories. You have complete control over that.
Yeah, I mean, we're incredibly proud of that. I think there are sometimes some misconceptions about manufacture overseas, and we are very proud to say we have a factory in China. We have an exceptional team that operates in that factory. It's in Zhuhai. We've been there for approaching 20 years, 2006. The most recent site we moved into more recently, though, it's a dedicated purpose-built or purpose-constructed and fitted out factory. It's ours, it's not somebody else's facility. And that has been responsible for the manufacture for some years of our 600 series, 700 series, and a host of other products as well, it must be said. And the quality, I think, of those products is exceptional. I think, again, that's the bit that sometimes frustrates me when you hear, I'm not going to say mischievous, but perhaps misguided commentary about manufacture there. I mean, the world is full of high-quality devices, not the least of which are the majority of the mobile phones that most people use today, manufactured in China. China is perfectly capable of making exceptional product. We're very proud to say, like I say, that we work there. What we do in that factory is assemble the loudspeaker cabinet. We have much of the same machinery in terms of, for example, drive unit assembly. We don't bend and form the cabinet construction like we do here in Dale Road in Worthing because the cabinet design, as you can see, is somewhat different. We send out the continuum cones from the UK. So in order to partially preserve and control our IP, our intellectual property on that, and also to preserve that consistency of approach, we ship from here to that factory for assembly there. But yeah, I mean, the outcome, well, let's be honest, I mean, you look at the product and hear the product, it's an exceptional, very high quality product. I think it fully justifies its positioning. And as I said, we're very proud to say it's made in China.
So S3, what are the differences between S3 and S2? Is it just cosmetic or are there actual major changes here?
That's what are the differences? How long have you got? A lot. We started off with trying to introduce a fundamental configuration change to the cabinet. You might notice it here. In fact, it's fairly straightforward to see. We have two S703 models here. This is a 703 S2 on that side. This is an S3 here. So it's slightly narrower. It's about 8mm narrower, which helps essentially to reduce the cabinet baffling effect and essentially free up the sound. It has a curvature now to the front, which is achieved essentially using a machined section. So it's not, like I said, bent wood. What we're doing is taking a thicker section of wood and then profile cutting it. But that helps us to get that curvature. The curvature in turn helps us to then use the pod, which of course is an intrinsic part of the Bowers & Wilkins design you've seen in the 800 series diamond, but it's now carried into the 700 series. The benefit of the pod, if I can try, and hopefully this comes across on the camera and the microphone to try and put it forward, is if you have the drive units in a flat plane like that, you have a degree of interaction with your hands. The sound becomes a bit sort of baffled, as it's called, and you can hear the effect of that. If I put myself in a pod and come forward like that, you can suddenly hear that there's less of a baffling effect than if I'm like that. So that's the idea. Essentially, we're trying to take the drive unit away from the cabinet. Combined with the pod, it means we reduce the audibility of the cabinet a wee bit. The curvature is a little bit helpful in terms of stiffness as well. It actually, again, reduces some of the mechanical output coming off the front of the cabinet. In terms of other major construction changes, the biggest one probably visually is here on the top. We have a new form for the tweeter on top. It's inspired by the tweeter on top form in the 800 series diamond. Fundamentally in how it behaves, how it's put together, the form, the shape, it's the same. It's actually a little bit shorter. But again, that's not necessarily a technical change. It actually has to be a functional one, because to use the 800 series one would mean the tube length would actually hang off the back of the cabinet, and that's not especially safe as much as anything else. but it's a decoupled system, so it floats, it's isolated from the rest of the cabinet. And we now have that on 4 models. I think that's a really big bit of news. We wanted to do this for quite some time. A great thing in the Series 3 is we now have 2 floor standing models, the 703, which is the model here, and the flagship 702. We have the 705, which obviously is the pinnacle stand mount model, and that's replaced in this new generation. And the really big news is we've introduced it to our center channel as well. So the HDM 71 is a tweeter on top, 5-inch, 3-way center channel. It's a really high performance bit of kit.
Now, you will notice that there are 2 models sitting next to each other here, the S2 and the S3. Now, these are the same model number, and as you'll see, we now move to tweeter on top. So you explained it to me during the demos, and we've had a lot of demonstrations today here at the facility, which I'll go through in a second. But you're looking at moving each model up slightly in the run, aren't you, in terms of the technology, in terms of the sound quality? Maybe explain that a little bit.
Yeah, so I mean, when we introduced the 804 D4, that went to a completely new cabinet form, the reverse wrap form, and had a significant increase in performance. And yes, in fairness, also it had an increase in price as well. What we decided to do then with the new 702 was to attempt to try and bridge the performance and, yes, the price gap between the top of the 700 series and the entry floor stander in the 800 series diamond range. So that model has had a real hot rod job on it in terms of all of the things that I've discussed already, for example, the pods, the tweeter on top form, etc. Of course, being a 702, it has one additional bass drive in it relative to this one, which makes it a really powerful sounding product. Major change in the configuration on that one is it's now a downward firing port. Essentially, although not exactly inspired by the port orientation in an 804. So using a downward firing port means we can use a much larger port, which means, of course, we can get more output from the thing than we ever could with a rear firing port. And we essentially are outputting that over the top of the plinth, so we're tuning exactly to that as well. So 702 has had a real, I would say, step change in capability, but also especially in scale. 703, therefore, is designed to kind of fill the role of the old 702. So it's kind of gone up by having tweeter on top, which it didn't previously have, as you can see. It doesn't have that downward firing port. It's the same port orientation as before, but it does have the subtle curvature to the front, the pods, and all the other things that kind of bring it on in terms of capability. And, well, you can be the judge on this, but you've heard the comparisons. We think it definitely is a big step change performance-wise. And then the same thing has applied with the other models. So that's what we're attempting to try and do in each case. Bring up and essentially fill the position of the old, by at the same time, as we've discussed already, kind of cascading in technologies. I think one of the ones that, of all the demos that you maybe have had, that probably surprises people the most is the littlest one, the 707, which is a relatively tiny little box. I mean, it's a 5-inch, and it's got a huge scale for the size of speaker that it is.
It's obviously, we're here at a manufacturer. It's your demonstration facilities. It's set up to get the most out of the product and so on. So with those caveats and a little bit pinch of salt, as you would, knowing our audience out there, but I've got to say I've been really impressed. And again, we're not talking placebo or anything like that. Experienced reviewer, I know to separate myself away from what it is that you're telling me that I should be able to hear it, but I can actually hear a difference. And it's not just a subtle difference when you're going from the small speaker and further up the range. There is that performance lift. And the one thing, and maybe you can explain this to me and the viewers, the one thing I did notice between the S2 and the S3 was an openness of the sound. The S2, great speaker, but as soon as you hear the S3, you think, well, the S2, it's very boxy. It's almost enclosed in comparison to that wider soundstage. So how have you managed to achieve that in the 5 years?
Well, again, I mean, that's exactly the role of cabinets and cabinet diffraction and kind of understanding cabinets. This is why we spend so much time on working on the construction, the form of the cabinet, and any speaker engineering team would say the same thing, that you're only as good as the enclosure that houses those drive units. So in this particular case, we're benefiting from that narrower baffle, which gets the drive units closer to the edge of the enclosure, which reduces to an extent the baffling effect. We've got the pod, which further helps, like I said, by kind of getting the drive unit forward of the baffle. One other big tech change that's really worth highlighting on all the three ways is the introduction of the biomimetic suspension, the suspension system that we introduced in last generation 800 series, so in the D4 of 800 series. And that is now present in all of the mid-ranges, so in the center channel and then the 704, 703 and 702. And I think on top of the cabinet-borne changes, that's probably the other thing that you're really hearing, that freedom through the mid. Bear in mind, this is a fully decoupled system, so it's on a sprung mount. It was in that one as well, but it's essentially using an 800 series specification decoupling system. I mean, to all intents and purposes, the mid-range, the unit that you're looking at there is the mid-range unit out of an 802 inside a 703, and small wonder therefore that it sounds very good, but also that's what's giving it that freedom and that openness, the lack of noise coming from behind the cone, and then the decoupling system as well.
So let's move away from stereo, but stay with the 700 S3 and look at home theatre or home cinema, which is the vast majority of people watching are interested in that. Like you say, 2 centre channel designs now with the 700. One of them's tweeter on top, which I believe is new for the 700 range. So maybe talk us through how you see the 700 being used in a multi-channel setup.
Yeah, okay, so I mean, a big deal first and foremost is just being able to do the tweeter on top configuration. It's something that we'd looked at doing before. I think it's pretty clear as we've gone forward that, you know, the majority of our audience at this price point is buying into direct view flat panel. We do have some of the audience that's buying into projected imagery, but the majority are larger screen flat panel. So that being the case, it's more a case of designing a horizontally orientated component that can fit in and around a kind of media wall or on a piece of furniture below a direct view. That said, then we need to first try and make it tonally match as best we possibly can to the main left and right pair, but also we need it to kind of disperse as freely as we can. You have to remember, and I've spoken about this enough times with soundbars, so you've probably heard it before, the viewing center and the acoustic center ideally should be as close as possible together as they can if you're going to get a believable time alignment, lip sync and everything else. The reality is, in a lot of systems, there's quite a considerable gap between those two, especially in a larger direct view. If you've got a 77 or above, the distance from the center of the screen to the bottom of the panel is quite a distance, enough of a distance to have a delay. Remember, 30 centimeters is a millisecond of delay, right? Yeah. So that's a substantial amount. So we are thinking all the time about how to get past that issue. In the new generation, the HTM71, it's got a fully floating decoupled 5-inch mid-range cone, using essentially the exact mid-range cone that you get in a 704. And then it's got a tweeter on top. And having the tweeter on top gives you that freedom and that openness and that spaciousness. In order to kind of then produce a relatively sleek, manageable component, we've got a pair of 5-inch LF. I'm sure a lot of the guys here will know that the last generation model had a pair of 6.5s. We decided that we had to take that choice because the alternative would have been a tweeter on top enabled model that was, you know, by the time you got the two units together, this tall. And you think about the use case and the typical customer, that would have meant putting your screen really high up on the wall or having the center down on the floor. Yeah. So there's a vertical height constraint that we've worked to. And we figured, look, the reality is everybody crosses over their center. There's not going to be any difference here. So having that bigger mid and that tweeter on top, the payoff is having those slightly smaller LF units. But okay, you're crossing it over anyway, so you don't lose out too much through that. You gain a lot everywhere else.
Now, tweeter on top, so it's a unique selling point of Bowers Wilkins speakers, but because of that, when it comes to Atmos, you're not going to be able to do your up firing speakers from the cabinets or whatever. So what's your solution for those that want Atmos? I mean, you've got the horizontal plane figured completely. You can put any models in there, they will tonally match on the horizontal. What about the height?
Yeah, it's a real conundrum for us. I mean, we are, as I hope you know, massive fans of Atmos. I mean, we work with obviously Philips TV with the Atmos-enabled speaker enclosures on their products. We have our own Panorama 3. And we have multiple cars that we produce or work with that also have Atmos-enabled audio systems, and going forward there'll be a lot more. So just to be really clear, there's no anti-Atmos here. It's quite the reverse. However, we do have certain constraints, as you said, partially by virtue of the tweeter on top thing. Now, the great thing about the tweeter on top configuration is it kind of extends the vertical height envelope anyway. I will fully concede, of course, that it doesn't put anything directly over your head, and therefore if you're looking for specific overheads, it doesn't necessarily solve that problem for you. What we do have as an advantage is that we have a range of matched in-wall and in-ceiling designs, the CI 700 series range. So there's a particular model which is a direct downward firing in-ceiling design, which basically has the same mid and the same high frequency as you'd find in a 702. So for the customer that wants to go that way, that would be our recommendation. Again, I do understand there will be certain customers who say, well, that's fine, but I don't want to cut holes in my ceiling. And at the moment, we don't have an obvious solution for that. We're looking at it. What I will say is we don't think we want to go down the road of, for want of a better expression, the Atmos hats, the speaker extenders that sit on top of the loudspeaker, because essentially for half of the range, they simply won't work. Yeah. So it needs to be thought of in a different way so that we can make it work, whether that's something that sits on the wall or on the ceiling. No promises, but we're looking at how to achieve it.
So just in summing up the 700 range, the S3s, from your perspective, what is it that you hope the AV Forums members will take away from this video and maybe going and demonstrating the speakers?
I think go in there with the best quality recordings that you can get and enjoy yourself first and foremost, right? I mean, I think anybody can make loudspeakers. I think I said that earlier on. I mean, if you wanted to do it yourself, you know, given enough determination and a bit of funding, you could be a loudspeaker manufacturer in 6 months' time. What the 700 series has to offer you is a groundswell, a sort of a whole series of experiences and technologies that have been driven on decades of knowledge, coming from a company that's been in this business for quite a long period of time by now. And wherever possible, we've informed the new range with everything that we know. I mean, we've got it as honed as we can possibly get it right now. In 6 or 7 years' time, I'm sure we'll come up with something better, because that's just how engineering is, that's how products are. But right now, we're really, really pleased with the 700 series. It's a good-looking, nicely designed, I think, well-made range of loudspeakers that offers very high performance, comes in all sorts of different sizes and categories, is suitable for stereo, is suitable for home theatre applications. Yeah, I just say give it a listen and have some fun with it.
Excellent. Well, I hope you've enjoyed the video and the visit here to Bowers & Wilkins. It's something that we intend to do a lot further in the future and get manufacturers involved, because I think you've got plenty to offer in terms of you know, history and where the company's coming from, and obviously you appreciate the feedback as well from the members out there who maybe don't own the products, but certainly are interested in where Bowers & Wilkins are going. So best of luck with the 700s.
Thank you.
I hope they are a success for you. Come back and watch more of the video coverage in the future. If you like this video, then please do give it a like. And if you want to see more videos like this, then please consider subscribing to the channel. But thanks for watching.